The auction house reeked of desperation and wet fur. I stood pressed against the back wall, my threadbare cloak doing little to shield me from the cold that seeped through the stone. Around me, bodies shifted and murmured, merchants with hungry eyes, collectors seeking exotic trophies, and others I couldn't quite categorize. Their voices merged into a low hum that made my skin crawl, a sound that reminded me too much of the night my village burned. 3 years. 3 years since I'd watched flames consume everything I knew, since I'd run into the forest with nothing but the clothes on my back, and a terror so deep it had carved itself into my bones. 3 years of surviving in the shadows of a world that had grown stranger, darker, filled with creatures I'd only heard about in whispered warnings. The auctioneer's voice cut through my thoughts. Sharp, practiced, devoid of mercy. Lot 47. A rare specimen, ladies and gentlemen. Lichen blood, though we cannot verify the purity. Aggressive, untamed, potentially dangerous. He paused for effect, his gold tooth catching the lamplight. Perfect for those seeking a challenge, or perhaps another pause. This one laden with implication, other purposes. Laughter rippled through the crowd, the kind that made my stomach turn. I shouldn't have been there. The coin in my pocket, my last coin, singular and precious, had been meant for bread, maybe enough dried meat to last me another week in the abandoned cottage I'd claimed at the forest's edge. But I'd heard rumors in the marketplace that morning. Whispers about creatures being captured, about lichens and vampires and things that belonged to the wild being caged and sold like livestock. Something about it had pulled at me, a memory, perhaps, of being hunted myself. The crowd parted as 2 men dragged the cage forward. It was barely large enough for the creature inside. A wolf, massive even in his confined crouch. His fur was matted, dark as midnight, and over his head they'd secured a burlap sack, tied so tightly I could see the outline of his muzzle pressing against the fabric. His body trembled, not with fear, I realized, but with barely contained rage. Chains wrapped around his limbs, silver by the way they seemed to burn against his skin. He made no sound, but I felt his fury from across the room, a tangible thing that made the air thick and hard to breathe. "We'll start the bidding at 50 gold coins," the auctioneer announced. Silence. I watched faces around me shift from interest to calculation. 50 gold was a fortune, more money than most people in this room would see in a year. The merchants exchanged glances, weighing risk against potential profit. The collectors pursed their lips, uncertain. 40 gold. The auctioneer tried again, voice edging toward annoyance. Surely someone recognizes the value here. Lichen specimens are increasingly rare, and this one is half dead, someone called out. Look at him. Probably been starved for weeks. What good is a creature that can't even stand? More murmurs of agreement. I found myself leaning forward, my heart beating strangely fast. The wolf's breathing was labored beneath the sack, his ribs visible through his fur. They had starved him. Kept him in silver that burned, in a cage too small, with his face covered so he couldn't even see his captors. 30 gold. The auctioneer's voice had lost its polish. 20, 10, still. No one moved. The crowd was losing interest, already turning toward the next lot. A vampire, judging by the ornate coffin being wheeled into position. 5 gold coins, the auctioneer said flatly. For 5 gold you can have him. Use him for sport, for study, for whatever purpose you see fit. 5 gold, and he's yours to do with as you please. My hand found the coin in my pocket. Single, copper, worth barely anything. The price of a loaf of bread, the difference between eating tomorrow and going hungry. The wolf shifted in his cage, and his head turned, blindly, but somehow directly toward me, toward where I stood hidden in the shadows at the back of the room. I thought of the forest 3 years ago, of running through flames with hunters at my back, their dogs baying for blood, of hiding in a hollow tree for 2 days, certain I would die there, small and alone and forgotten, of the deer that had appeared on the 3rd morning, standing so close I could have touched it, its dark eyes meeting mine with something that looked almost like understanding before it bounded away. And the hunters had followed it, leaving me alive. The forest had saved me once. Perhaps I could save something in return. 1 copper coin, I heard myself say. Every head in the room turned. The auctioneer squinted into the shadows, trying to locate the source of the voice. I stepped forward, my legs shaking, acutely aware of how I must look. A girl barely into womanhood, thin from years of scraping by. My blonde hair hacked short with a dull knife, my clothes more patches than original fabric. "I'm sorry?" The auctioneer's expression hovered between disbelief and amusement. "Did you say 1 copper?" "Yes." My voice came out stronger than I expected. 1 copper coin. "It's all I have." The crowd erupted in laughter. Not the malicious kind from before, but the sort directed at a child who said something absurdly naive. A woman in silk robes actually wiped tears from her eyes. "My dear girl," the auctioneer began, in the tone of someone explaining reality to a simpleton. "This is a lichen, a dangerous wild creature worth nothing, apparently." I kept my eyes on the wolf, not the crowd. No one else bid. You were about to move on. 1 copper is more than 0 gold. The auctioneer's jaw worked soundlessly. Someone in the crowd whispered, "She's got a point." Another voice added, "Let her have the beast. It'll probably kill her within the hour." Good entertainment. More laughter. But the auctioneer was looking at me differently now, his expression calculating. I understood. He wanted to be done with a lot that had become an embarrassment, and there was probably entertainment value in watching a foolish girl get herself killed. "Very well." He cracked his gavel against the podium. "Sold to the young lady for 1 copper coin. May the gods have mercy on your soul." I walked forward on numb legs, the crowd parting with exaggerated care, as if I carried a disease. The wolf's cage was heavy, but the men who dragged it forward made no move to help me. Instead, they stepped back quickly once I'd pressed my single coin into the auctioneer's palm. "You'll want to keep that sack on his head," one of them advised, his face pale. "And don't remove the chains, not ever. That's not just any lichen girl. There's something wrong with him, something dark." I nodded, not trusting my voice. Up close, the wolf was even larger than I'd thought, easily the size of a draft horse, maybe bigger. His breathing rattled in his chest. The silver chains had left raw wounds on his legs, burns that wept clear fluid. I grabbed the cage's handle with both hands and pulled. It didn't budge. Behind me, fresh laughter erupted. "This will be good," someone said. 20 copper says she doesn't make it to the door. 10 says the beast breaks free before she clears the building. Hot shame flooded my cheeks, but I set my jaw and pulled harder. The cage scraped forward an inch, then another. My muscles screamed, my hands already blistering on the rough metal. But I kept pulling. Slowly, painfully slowly, the cage moved toward the door. The wolf remained utterly still. He could have thrashed, could have made this harder, but he didn't. It was as if he'd decided to simply wait. It took me nearly 20 minutes to drag the cage out of the auction house and into the alley behind it. By the time I'd managed it, my palms were bleeding. My breath came in gasps, and darkness had fallen completely over the city. I collapsed against the alley wall, my body shaking with exhaustion. The wolf's breathing had grown worse. Shallow, pained. In the dim moonlight, I could see how the silver had burned deep. Could smell the infection setting in. He was dying. I'd bought a dying wolf for my last coin. And now we were both going to perish, him from his wounds, me from starvation. "I'm sorry," I whispered, not even sure why I was apologizing. I don't know what I thought I could do. I couldn't watch them. I couldn't finish the sentence, couldn't explain the compulsion that had made me speak up, that had driven me to spend everything I had on a creature I couldn't help. My hands moved to the chains despite the warnings, despite logic. They were too tight, cutting into his flesh. If he was going to die, at least he could die without this extra pain. The silver burned my palms as I worked at the locks. Simple mechanisms designed more for humiliation than security. They clicked open one by one, and I let the chains fall away. The wolf's breathing changed, deepened. His muscles tensed. I should have been afraid, should have run. But I was too tired, too resigned to my own foolishness. Instead, I reached for the sack over his head. "Easy," I murmured, the way I'd once soothed frightened animals in my village. I'm just going to... The fabric was damp with his breath, tied with multiple knots. My fingers fumbled at them, clumsy with exhaustion and blood loss from my torn palms. Finally, the last knot loosened, and I pulled the sack away. The wolf's eyes met mine. They were silver. Not gray, but true silver. Bright as moonlight. Bright as the metal that had burned him. And they were filled with an intelligence that stole my breath. A consciousness that was far more than animal. He stared at me for a long moment, his gaze moving over my face, my ragged clothes, my bleeding hands. Then, slowly, deliberately, he lowered his massive head and rested it against my lap. The weight of it was enormous. I could feel his heart beating against my thigh, could feel the heat of fever in his body, and I realized with a strange, dreamlike certainty that whatever I'd bought for my last copper coin, it wasn't just a wolf. Thunder rumbled in the distance. The first drops of rain began to fall, and in the darkness of the alley, the wolf's eyes never left my face. The rain came down in sheets, turning the alley into a river of filth and debris. I sat frozen, the wolf's head still resting against my lap, those silver eyes watching me with an intensity that made my chest tight. Water soaked through my cloak within minutes, plastering my short hair to my skull, but I couldn't seem to move. The weight of him anchored me, not just physically, but in some way I couldn't name. "We can't stay here," I finally managed, my voice barely audible over the drumming rain. "You need shelter, medicine. I need to..." What? What did I need to do? I had no home to speak of, just the abandoned cottage with its leaking roof and broken windows. No money for medicine, no knowledge of how to treat wounds this severe. I'd acted on impulse, on some desperate need to save something when I hadn't been able to save anything else, and now we were both going to pay for my foolishness. The wolf lifted his head slowly, painfully. Even that small movement made him tremble. He looked at the cage, then at me, then toward the mouth of the alley where the city street beckoned with its dangerous exposure. His meaning was clear. "We need to move." "Can you walk?" I asked, then felt ridiculous for expecting an answer. But he responded, not with words, but by dragging himself forward out of the cage. His legs shook violently, and twice he nearly collapsed. But there was a determination in his movements that spoke of an iron will. He made it 3 steps before his front legs buckled. I caught him without thinking, my arms wrapping around his massive neck. The fever burned through his fur, hot enough that I gasped. He was dying. The infection from the silver, the starvation, the abuse, it was all killing him by degrees, and there was nothing I could do about it. "Please," I whispered against his fur, "please don't die. Not after... I didn't spend everything just to watch you die in an alley." His body shifted against mine, and I felt rather than heard the sound he made, a low rumble that might have been acknowledgement or simply pain. Then, with effort that must have cost him dearly, he pushed himself back to his feet. We moved through the rain-slicked streets like ghosts, me supporting as much of his weight as I could manage, him somehow staying upright through sheer stubbornness. The city at night was a different beast than during the day, darker, more honest about its nature. We passed taverns spilling drunken laughter into the streets, shadowed doorways where transactions I didn't want to understand took place, and twice we had to hide from patrol guards who would have killed him on sight. Each time we stopped, I wasn't sure he'd be able to start again. But each time, after a moment's rest, he would lever himself up, and we would continue. It took us nearly 2 hours to reach the forest's edge, 2 hours that felt like days, every minute stretched by fear and exhaustion. By the time we stumbled onto the overgrown path leading to the cottage, my legs were numb, and the wolf's breathing had taken on a wet, rattling quality that terrified me. The cottage appeared through the trees like a memory, small, half-collapsed but dry. I'd found it 6 months ago, had spent weeks making it barely habitable. It wasn't much, but it had kept me alive through the winter. Getting the wolf inside required every remaining ounce of my strength. The doorway was narrow, his body enormous, and halfway through he lost consciousness entirely, becoming dead weight that nearly crushed me. Somehow, I still don't know how, I managed to drag him the rest of the way, pulling him into the main room before collapsing beside him. For several minutes, I simply lay there, gasping, my vision swimming with dark spots. The rain hammered against the roof, finding every leak, creating a symphony of drips and splashes around us. Then training I didn't remember having kicked in. My mother had been a healer before the fire, before everything ended. I'd been too young to learn much, but some things had stuck. Muscle memory buried deep. I forced myself up, lit the cottage's single oil lamp with shaking hands, and assessed the damage. The burns were worse than I'd thought. The silver had eaten through fur and into flesh, leaving wounds that wept and stank of infection. His ribs showed starkly through his coat. They'd starved him for weeks, maybe months. There were older scars, too, marks that told stories of battles I couldn't imagine. I had so little. A half jar of honey I'd been hoarding, some clean rags I'd washed in the stream, a small pot for boiling water. No proper medicine, no herbs, nothing that could truly help him, but I had to try. I worked through the night, boiling water over the small fire, cleaning his wounds as gently as I could while he lay unconscious. The honey went on to the worst burns, an old remedy my mother had sworn by for preventing infection. I tore my spare dress into bandages, wrapping his legs with hands that wouldn't stop shaking. He woke once, around midnight, his silver eyes finding me immediately. I expected him to snap, to lash out in pain and confusion. Instead, he simply watched me work, his gaze following my movements with that same unsettling intelligence. "I'm sorry," I said, because I didn't know what else to say. "I know it hurts, but the wounds need to be clean or he would die." We both knew it. He made that low rumbling sound again, and after a moment, I realized it was meant to be reassuring. He was trying to comfort me while I tended wounds that must have felt like fire. Something in my chest cracked open at that. I'd been alone for so long, trusting nothing, connecting with no one. Survival had made me small and hard and closed off, but here in this broken cottage, tending a creature that by all logic should have killed me, I felt something long dormant stirring. "My name is Elena," I told him softly, returning to my work. "I don't know if you can understand me, but you should have a name to hold on to, something to remember that you're more than what they made you." His eyes never left my face. By dawn, I'd done everything I could. The wounds were clean, bandaged, coated in honey. I'd managed to get some water down his throat using a cup and patience. But he was still burning with fever, still shaking with chills that racked his enormous frame. I lay down beside him, too exhausted to care about propriety or danger. My head rested against his shoulder, and I could feel his heartbeat, too fast, too irregular. "Don't die," I whispered one more time. "Please. I've lost too much already." Sleep claimed me before I could say anything else. I woke to sunlight streaming through the broken windows and the feeling of being watched. The wolf was awake, his silver eyes fixed on me with an expression I couldn't read, but something had changed. The fever had broken. I could tell by the way he breathed, easier now, deeper. And there was a new awareness in his gaze, a focus that made my breath catch, slowly, carefully. He lifted his head. The movement was still painful, but no longer seemed impossible. He looked at his bandaged legs, then at me, then around the cottage, taking in every detail of our surroundings. When his gaze returned to me, something passed between us, a current of understanding that had no words. He knew what I'd done, knew that I'd spent everything, risked everything, for a creature I didn't know. And I knew, with sudden certainty, that he would remember. "You're better," I said, relief flooding through me so strongly I felt dizzy. The fever broke. "You're going to be okay." He studied me for a long moment, then did something that stopped my heart. He bowed his head, a gesture of such profound respect and acknowledgement that it couldn't possibly be instinct. It was deliberate, purposeful, a sign of recognition from one conscious being to another. This wasn't just a lichen, this was someone important, someone powerful, and I'd bought him for a single copper coin. The thought should have terrified me. Instead, all I felt was a strange sense of rightness, as if some invisible path had led me to that auction house, had put that coin in my pocket, had made me speak up when every instinct screamed to stay silent. Over the following days, I watched him heal with a speed that shouldn't have been possible. The burns that should have taken months to recover from began closing within a week. His strength returned in increments, until he could stand without assistance, then walk, then move with a grace that made the cottage feel impossibly small. But he didn't leave, and I didn't ask him to. We fell into a strange rhythm. I would hunt, poorly, with snares I barely knew how to set, and he would watch, sometimes helping by herding small game toward my traps with a subtlety that spoke of intelligence and patience. I would talk, filling the silence with stories of my village, my family, the before times that felt like someone else's life. He would listen, those silver eyes tracking every word, every expression. Sometimes in the evening, he would rest his head on my lap the way he had in the alley, and I would run my fingers through his fur, feeling the steady beat of his heart. Those were the moments when the loneliness that had haunted me for 3 years finally receded, replaced by something I was afraid to name. 2 weeks after the auction, everything changed. I woke to find him standing by the window, his body tense, his ears pricked forward. Dawn light gilded his dark fur, making him look almost ethereal. But it was his posture that sent alarm racing through me. Predatory, alert, dangerous. "What is it?" I whispered, reaching for the small knife I kept by my bedroll. He turned to look at me, and in his eyes I saw something I hadn't seen before. Conflict. Indecision. As if he were standing at a crossroads and couldn't decide which path to take. Then I heard it. Voices in the distance, coming closer. Men's voices, calling out in a language that made my blood run cold. They were searching for something, searching for him. The wolf's lips pulled back from his teeth, a silent snarl. But he didn't move toward the door. Instead, he moved toward me, placing his body between me and the approaching sounds. He was protecting me. Even though running would save him, even though I was nothing to him, he was choosing to stand between me and danger. My hand found his fur, gripping tight. "We hide," I said. "Both of us. There's a space under the floor. It's small, but—" He shook his head. Actually shook his head in denial. The gesture so human it made my heart stutter. The voices were getting closer. I could make out words now. Tracks lead here. "The king won't find him before king." They'd said king. I looked at the wolf, truly looked at him, and saw what I'd been too naive, too desperate to see before. The way he carried himself, even wounded. The intelligence in his eyes, the scars of 100 battles, the power that radiated from him even in this diminished state. "Oh gods," I breathed. "You're not just any lichen. You're—" The cottage door exploded inward. 5 men poured through the shattered doorway, and the morning light caught on steel and silver, weapons designed to kill creatures like the one standing before me. I couldn't move. Terror had turned my legs to stone, my breath to ice in my lungs. These weren't city guards or common thugs. These were soldiers, trained and deadly, their movements coordinated in a way that spoke of years fighting together. The leader was a tall man with a scarred face and eyes like flint. And when his gaze locked onto the wolf, something flickered there, relief mixed with fury. "Found you," he growled, his sword already raised. 3 weeks we've been searching. 3 weeks thinking you were—" He stopped abruptly as his eyes shifted to me, taking in my position half behind the wolf, my hand still buried in dark fur. His expression twisted into something between confusion and disgust. "Step away from it, girl. That creature is dangerous beyond your comprehension." The wolf's growl started low in his chest, a sound that vibrated through the floorboards and into my bones. It was a warning, primal and unmistakable. The men hesitated, their weapons shifting nervously. "I said step away!" The leader's voice cracked like a whip. "That's an order. We're here to retrieve what was stolen, and you're interfering with royal business." Royal business. The word hung in the air, confirming what I'd begun to suspect. My fingers tightened in the wolf's fur, and I felt him tense, ready to spring despite the fact that he was still healing, still weak. He would fight them. He would die fighting them to protect me, a girl who'd shown him one act of kindness. I couldn't let that happen. "He wasn't stolen," I heard myself say, my voice trembling but clear. "I bought him. At auction. Legally, he's mine." The words sounded absurd even as I spoke them, but something in the leader's face shifted. He lowered his sword slightly, studying me with new interest. You bought him? For 1 copper coin. I have witnesses. The whole auction house saw. One of the other soldiers, a younger man with kind eyes, let out a sound that might have been a laugh or a groan. Gods above, is that where you ended up? An auction? He was speaking to the wolf now, not to me. Your brother has been losing his mind. Half the kingdom is out searching and you're enough. The leader's voice cut him off. His gaze moved between me and the wolf, calculation replacing some of the anger. Girl, I don't know what you think you've bought, but that's no ordinary lichen. That's... The wolf moved then, not toward them, but toward me, pressing his shoulder against my legs in a gesture that was unmistakable. Stay behind me. Stay safe. The leader's eyes widened. You're protecting her? The question was directed at the wolf, as if expecting an answer. By the old laws, you're defending this human as if she were pack. Silence fell over the cottage, broken only by the sound of rain beginning again outside. The soldiers exchanged glances, confusion and uncertainty replacing their battle readiness. Something significant had just happened, something I didn't understand but could feel in the sudden tension. The kind-eyed soldier spoke carefully. Sir, if he's claimed her as pack, we can't simply... I know the laws, Garrett. The leader's jaw worked soundlessly for a moment. Then he did something unexpected. He sheathed his sword. The other men followed suit, though their hands remained close to their weapons. This complicates matters considerably. He focused on me, his expression less hostile now, but no less intense. What's your name, girl? Elena. My voice came out steadier than I felt. And I don't understand what's happening, but I'm not leaving him. You'll have to kill me first. The wolf made a sound, sharp, almost anguished. His head swung toward me, those silver eyes blazing with something that looked like panic. He didn't want me making threats I couldn't back up, didn't want me putting myself in more danger. But I meant every word. 3 years of running, of hiding, of being invisible. Something in me had broken open the night I'd pulled the sack from his head. I was done being afraid, done being nothing. The leader studied us both for a long moment, then sighed heavily. My name is Captain Dryston. These are my men. We serve the royal house of Silvercrest, and we've been searching for our king for 3 weeks. He gestured to the wolf. You bought Rowan Silvercrest, High King of the Lichen Territories, for a single copper coin. The world tilted sideways. King. He was a king. And I dragged him through the streets, bandaged him with torn clothing, let him sleep on the floor of a hovel that barely qualified as shelter. I'd petted him like a dog, talked to him like a child, told him stories about catching rabbits and missing my mother. Heat flooded my face. I tried to step back, to put proper distance between myself and royalty, but the wolf, Rowan, moved with me, still keeping himself between me and the soldiers. He can't shift, Garrett said quietly, something like pity in his voice. Can you, sire? Whatever they did to you in that place, it's locked you in this form. Rowan's head dipped once, acknowledgement and frustration in the movement. Captain Drystan's expression darkened. The auction house. Tell me everything about it. Who ran it? Who attended? Who captured him in the first place? I told them what little I knew, the location, the auctioneer's description, the crowd's reaction. It wasn't much, but Drystan listened intently, his face growing harder with each detail. They used silver, he said quietly. Not just chains, but something else. Something to suppress his ability to shift, to make him vulnerable. He looked at Rowan. How long were you captive? Rowan moved to the wall, where I'd scratched marks to count days. Using his nose, he indicated a number that made my stomach drop. 43 marks. 43 days of torture, starvation, humiliation. Mercenaries, Garrett spat. Has to be. Paid by someone who knew what they were doing. Someone who wanted him dead or broken, another soldier added. Someone with access to old magic. Captain Drystan ran a hand over his scarred face. This is an act of war. When we find who's responsible, he stopped, collecting himself. But first, we need to get you home, sire. The kingdom is unstable without you. Your brother is doing his best, but there are factions already circling, sensing weakness. Rowan looked at me, and in his eyes I saw the conflict again. Duty pulling him one way, something else pulling him another. He stays with me, I said, before I could stop myself. Until he can shift again, until he's fully healed, he stays with me. The cottage went silent. That's not possible, Captain Dryston said flatly. He's the king. He has responsibilities, obligations. He's injured. I stood straighter, forcing authority I didn't feel into my voice. Those burns will take weeks to fully heal. The infection could return. And you said it yourself. He's claimed me as pack. Doesn't that mean something in your culture? Drystan's jaw clenched. It means everything. It means you're under his protection, bound by laws older than the kingdom itself. But it also means... He trailed off, looking at Rowan. It means he's bound to you as well. To your well-being, your safety. Then take us both. The words came out before I could think them through. If he needs to return to his kingdom, I'll go with him. But I won't let you separate us. You don't understand what you're asking. Garrett stepped forward, his kind eyes troubled. The court is a dangerous place, especially now. There are Lycans who would see a human as weakness, as something to exploit. You'd be a target, a pawn in political games you can't imagine. I don't care. And I didn't. The thought of returning to solitude, of losing the first connection I'd felt in 3 years, was unbearable. I'm going with him. Rowan made a sound. Approval, relief, something warm that resonated through our contact. Then he moved, slowly and deliberately, pressing his forehead against my shoulder in a gesture I was beginning to understand. Trust. Acceptance. Agreement. Captain Dryston looked between us, something complicated playing across his features. This is irregular, unprecedented. A human girl, purchased for a copper coin, accompanying the king back to Silvercrest. He shook his head. The court will lose their minds. Let them, I said quietly. A smile ghosted across the captain's face, there and gone. You have courage, I'll give you that. Foolish courage, perhaps, but courage nonetheless. He turned to his men. Spread out, search the perimeter, make sure we weren't followed. As they moved to obey, he focused back on us. We leave at nightfall. It's safer to travel under cover of darkness, and it will give you time to prepare. After the soldiers left to patrol, the cottage felt simultaneously too small and too empty. Rowan moved to the corner where I'd set up my meager belongings, sniffing at the small bundle that represented everything I owned. It's not much, I said, embarrassed. I travel light. Have to, when you're always ready to run, when nowhere is really home. I didn't finish the sentence. Rowan looked at me, and I could swear I saw understanding in those silver eyes. He knew about running, about being alone even when surrounded by people. He was a king, but that didn't mean he hadn't known loneliness. I moved to sit beside him, my back against the wall. I'm sorry, I said quietly. I should have realized what you were, should have been more respectful, more... He bumped his head against my shoulder, cutting off the apology. Then he did something that stole my breath. He shifted his massive body until he could lay his head in my lap again, just as he had in the alley. A king, placing himself in a position of vulnerability, of trust. My hands found his fur automatically, fingers working through the thick coat the way I'd done every evening for the past 2 weeks. Everything's about to change, isn't it? I whispered. This cottage, this quiet life. It's over. A low rumble answered me, but whether it was agreement or reassurance, I couldn't tell. We sat like that as the sun climbed higher, as the rain came and went, as the reality of what I'd agreed to slowly settled into my bones. I was going to a kingdom of Lycans, to a court that would hate me, to a world I knew nothing about, but I wouldn't be alone, and neither would he. When nightfall came, Captain Dryston returned with horses and traveling cloaks. He'd brought clothing for me, simple but well made, far better than my patched dress. From a village we passed through, he explained. You'll need to look presentable. I changed quickly behind a screen made of blankets, acutely aware of the soldiers waiting outside. The clothes fit reasonably well, and when I emerged, I caught something like approval in Garrett's expression. "You clean up well," he said with a small smile, "for a girl who bought a king for a copper coin." Despite everything, I found myself smiling back. The journey to Silvercrest would take 5 days, Drystan explained. 5 days traveling through territories I'd never seen, toward a destiny I couldn't imagine. Rowan would travel beside my horse, close enough to protect, but far enough to avoid drawing attention. As we prepared to leave, I took one last look at the cottage. My refuge, my hiding place, my home for the past 6 months. It would stand empty now, slowly falling back into the forest's embrace. "Ready?" Captain Drystan asked. I looked at Rowan, who stood waiting in the moonlight, his silver eyes reflecting the stars. He dipped his head once, an invitation and a promise. "Ready," I said, and we rode into the darkness, toward a future that terrified and exhilarated me in equal measure. The Silvercrest Palace rose from the mountain like something out of legend. All white stone and silver towers that caught the moonlight and threw it back in brilliant cascades. We'd been traveling for 4 days, and with each mile, the landscape had transformed from the wild forests I knew into cultivated beauty that spoke of power and ancient magic. I was exhausted. 4 days in the saddle had left me sore in places I didn't know could hurt, and the closer we got to the palace, the more my anxiety grew. Rowan had stayed close throughout the journey, never more than a few feet from my horse, his presence a constant reassurance. But even he seemed tense now, his ears constantly swiveling, his body coiled tight. "The court doesn't know yet," Captain Drystan had explained earlier. "We sent word ahead that we found him, but not. The circumstances. They're expecting their king. They're not expecting you." The palace gates opened as we approached, massive doors of silver-veined wood that moved soundlessly despite their size. Guards lined the entrance, lichens in human form, I realized, their eyes flashing with an inner light that marked them as other. They bowed deeply as Rowan passed, but their gazes lingered on me with undisguised confusion, and in some cases, hostility. I kept my chin up, my hands steady on the reins, even as my heart hammered against my ribs. The courtyard beyond was filled with people. Word had spread fast. The king had returned. Lichens in various states of transformation crowded the space, some fully human, others with wolf features bleeding through, all of them focused on Rowan with expressions ranging from relief to concern to calculation. A man pushed through the crowd, younger than Rowan appeared, with the same silver eyes but lighter coloring, his features sharp with worry and exhaustion. He stopped short when he saw Rowan, his face crumpling with emotion. "Brother," he breathed, the word barely audible. Then he was moving again, dropping to his knees before the massive wolf. "Thank the old gods. We thought. We feared." Rowan moved forward, pressing his forehead against his brother's, a gesture of affection and reassurance. The crowd murmured, relief palpable in the air, but then the brother's eyes found me, still mounted on my horse, and his expression shifted to confusion. "Who is this?" he asked, rising. "Captain Drystan, who is this human? And why—" "Her name is Elena," Drystan said carefully. "She's the reason we found him. She's also complicated." The brother, the prince, I realized, looked between us, his intelligence sharp in those silver eyes. Complicated how? Rowan moved then, walking back to stand beside my horse, his meaning clear. The crowd's murmurs grew louder, confusion spreading like wildfire. "She purchased him," Drystan said bluntly, "at auction, for 1 copper coin, and he's claimed her as pack." Silence crashed over the courtyard. Then chaos erupted. Voices raised in shock, anger, disbelief. I saw faces twist with rage, others with calculation. A woman with silver-streaked hair pushed forward, her elegant features contorted with fury. "Pack?" she spat. "He's claimed a human as pack? That's impossible. It's against every tradition, It's his right as king," Drystan interrupted, his voice cutting through the noise. "The old laws are clear. A king's choice of pack is sovereign and unquestionable. But she's human," another voice called out. "Weak, fragile, Pray. Rowan's snarl silenced them instantly. It was a sound of pure dominance, of power that needed no human form to be absolute. Several lichens actually backed away, their eyes dropping in automatic submission. The prince raised his hands, calling for calm. Everyone, please. This is a joyous occasion. Our king has returned. The details can be sorted out later. For now. He looked at me, and I saw the calculation behind his courtesy. For now, let's welcome both our returning king and his companion. It wasn't exactly warm, but it was better than open hostility. I dismounted carefully, my legs shaking from more than just the long ride. Rowan immediately pressed against my side, his bulk a solid wall of protection. The prince approached us, his movements careful. I'm Theron, he said to me. Rowan's brother, acting regent in his absence. He paused, his eyes searching my face. You saved him? I bought him, I corrected quietly. I didn't know what he was. I just couldn't watch him die. Something shifted in Theron's expression. Surprise, perhaps even respect. For 1 copper coin, your last coin, from what Dryston tells me, heat crept up my neck. It was all I had, and you spent it on a dying wolf in an auction house. Theron studied me for a long moment, then looked at his brother. She's either the bravest fool in the kingdom or something else entirely. I can't decide which. Rowan rumbled, the sound somehow conveying amusement. Come, Theron said, gesturing toward the palace. You both need rest, food, and privacy. The court can wait until tomorrow to satisfy their curiosity. He paused. Though I warn you, tomorrow will not be easy. There are those who will see your presence as weakness, as opportunity. I understand, I said, though I wasn't sure I did. The palace interior was overwhelming. High ceilings covered in murals of wolves and forests, silver inlaid in intricate patterns across marble floors, tapestries that seemed to move in the corner of my vision. Servants bowed as we passed, their eyes widening when they saw Rowan still in wolf form, then widening further when they saw me walking beside him. Theron led us through winding corridors to a suite of rooms that were larger than my entire cottage. The king's chambers, he explained. I've been maintaining them, but they're yours again now. He looked at me. There's an adjoining room prepared for you, unless... He trailed off meaningfully. Rowan moved to stand directly between the 2 rooms, making his preference clear, not separate. Together. Theron's eyebrows rose. Very well. I'll have servants bring food and water. There's a healer who specializes in transformation magic. I'll send her in the morning. Perhaps she can determine what's blocking your ability to shift. This last was directed at Rowan, concern heavy in his voice. After Theron left, I stood in the center of the opulent room, feeling completely out of place. Rich carpets cushioned my feet. A bed large enough for 5 people dominated one wall, and windows overlooked gardens that glowed with moonlight and what might have been magic. This is your world, I said quietly, turning to Rowan, and I don't belong in it. He came to me immediately, pressing his head against my chest. I wrapped my arms around his neck, breathing in his familiar scent. Forest and rain and something wild. They hate me already, I continued. Did you see their faces? I'm human, I'm nothing, and I'm standing beside their king like I have any right to be here. Rowan pulled back just enough to look at me, his silver eyes intense. Then he did something he'd done only once before. He bowed his head, deeply, a gesture of profound respect and acknowledgement. I don't want your submission, I whispered. I just want... What? What did I want? His safety, yes, but also something I was afraid to name, something that had been growing in my chest since the night in the alley, fed by quiet evenings and shared silences and the way he looked at me like I was worth protecting. A knock at the door interrupted us. Servants entered with trays of food, roasted meat, fresh bread, fruits I'd never seen before. They set everything carefully on a low table, their eyes darting between us nervously before they bowed and retreated. I realized I was starving. 4 days of travel rations had left me hollow. I moved to the table, then hesitated, looking at Rowan. Should I... Is there protocol? Do you eat first because you're king, or... He bumped my leg with his head, pushing me toward the food. Eat. Please. So I did, tearing into the bread with an enthusiasm that probably looked uncivilized. Rowan ate as well, more delicately than I would have expected, his table manners somehow intact despite his form. Tomorrow, I said between bites. The healer comes. Maybe she can fix whatever's keeping you locked like this. You'll shift back to human form, and then... I swallowed hard. Then you won't need me anymore. You'll have your voice back, your court, your proper place. The growl that came from him was low and immediate. I looked up to find him staring at me with something fierce in his eyes. He moved around the table until he was directly in front of me, then rested his head in my lap, our position. The one we'd fallen into night after night in the cottage. My hands found his fur automatically. You'll still want this? I asked softly. Even when you're yourself again, even when I'm just a girl who got lucky with a copper coin? He pressed harder against me, his whole body language screaming affirmation. We stayed like that, until exhaustion finally claimed us both. I moved to the enormous bed, intending to sleep on one side and leave him the floor, but Rowan simply jumped up beside me. The bed dipped under his weight, and within moments, he'd arranged himself so that I was tucked against his side, his warmth surrounding me. This is highly irregular, I murmured, already half asleep. Probably breaks a dozen protocols. His rumble of amusement was the last thing I heard before sleep pulled me under. I woke to sunlight streaming through windows and the sound of raised voices beyond the door. Rowan was already awake, his body tense, ears pricked toward the commotion. Cannot be allowed. A human in the king's chambers is an insult to every... The king's choices are not subject to your approval, counselor. That was Theron's voice, hard with authority. I suggest you remember that, Prince Theron. We mean no disrespect, but surely you see the position this puts us in. Other kingdoms will see it as weakness. The human territories will think we've gone soft. And internally, there are those who already question whether a king who was captured and collared is fit to... Rowan's snarl cut through the door. The voices outside fell silent. I sat up, my heart pounding. They're questioning your fitness to rule. Because of what happened to you. Because of me. He looked at me, and I saw no regret in his eyes. Only determination. We need to fix this, I said quietly. We need to show them you're still strong, still capable, which means we need to get you shifted back to human form. As if summoned by my words, another knock came at the door. This one was gentle, followed by a woman's voice. Your Majesty? I'm Moira, the healer Prince Theron sent me. I opened the door to find an older woman with kind eyes and silver hair braided with herbs. She took in the scene, me in yesterday's clothes, Rowan on the bed, without judgment. So, she said calmly, entering and closing the door behind her. Let's see what we're dealing with. She examined Rowan with practiced efficiency, her hands glowing faintly with magic as she traced the old burn marks, probed gently at his form. Her expression grew increasingly troubled. It's blood magic, she said finally. Old blood magic, mixed with silver, and something else I don't recognize. Whoever did this knew exactly what they were doing. They didn't just suppress your ability to shift. They bound it, locked it away behind walls that will take time and effort to break down. How much time? I asked. Moira hesitated. Weeks, maybe months. This isn't something that can be undone with a simple spell. It will require ritual, sacrifice, and, she looked at me. It will require an anchor, someone bound to him by choice and will. Someone who can help guide him back to his human form. I'll do it, I said immediately. Whatever you need. Elena. Theron had entered during the examination, his expression concerned. You don't understand what you're offering. Blood magic rituals are dangerous. They could hurt you, change you. I don't care. I looked at Rowan, saw the frustration and pain in his silver eyes. He saved me in that cottage. He protected me from his own soldiers. I'm not going to abandon him now, because there's risk involved. Moira and Theron exchanged glances. Then the healer smiled. A real smile, warm with approval. You chose well, Your Majesty, she said to Rowan. This one has the heart of a wolf. even if she wears human skin. Rowan's rumble of agreement made my chest tight. We'll begin preparations, Moira said, but it will take several days to gather what we need. In the meantime, she looked at me seriously. You need to learn about our world, our customs. You need to be ready for the court, because they will not be kind. And you need to decide, are you here just to help him shift back? Or are you here for something more? The question hung in the air, heavy with implication. I looked at Rowan, at the king who'd trusted me with his vulnerability, who'd chosen to protect rather than dominate, who looked at me like I was precious rather than disposable. Something more, I said quietly. I'm here for something more. The next 3 weeks were a whirlwind of lessons, rituals, and navigating a court that viewed me with emotions ranging from curiosity to outright hostility. Moira became my unexpected guide. Each morning, she would arrive at dawn with herbs, texts, and patience I didn't deserve. She taught me about lichen customs, the hierarchy, the challenges, the delicate dance of dominance and submission that governed their society. She explained that Rowan's claiming of me as Pack was unprecedented, but not illegal, that it bound us in ways even I didn't fully understand yet. Pack bonds are sacred, she said one morning as we prepared ingredients for that evening's ritual. They're not just social structures, they're magical, written into the very essence of what we are. When a lichen claims someone as Pack, they're saying, your life is as valuable as my own. Your well-being is my responsibility. Your pain is my pain. For a king to claim a human? She shook her head, wonder in her eyes. It's a statement of revolutionary proportions. They think I've bewitched him, I said quietly, crushing herbs with more force than necessary. I heard the counselors yesterday. They think I'm using some kind of human magic to control him. Let them think what they want. Moira's voice was firm. Those who matter see the truth. Prince Theron sees it. I see it. And most importantly, Rowan sees it. Rowan himself was a constant presence, never more than a room away. During my lessons, he would lie in the corner, watching with those intelligent silver eyes. When I met with the court, and Theron insisted I must, to establish my position, Rowan would stand beside me, his mere presence silencing the worst of the hostility. But I could see the frustration building in him. A king trapped in wolf form, unable to speak, unable to properly rule. Theron was doing his best, but there were decisions only Rowan could make. Disputes that required the king's voice. The kingdom was in a holding pattern, waiting. The rituals to break the blood magic grew more intense each night. Moira would draw circles in salt and silver, chant in languages I didn't recognize, while I sat in the center with Rowan, my hands on his fur, my will focused entirely on him. We were trying to forge a connection strong enough to pull him back to his human form, to break through the walls that had been built around his ability to shift. It was exhausting. Each ritual left me drained, seeing double, my head pounding with the effort. But slowly, incrementally, we were making progress. Moira said she could feel the walls weakening, the magic responding to our combined will. One more ritual, she said on the 21st day, tomorrow night, during the full moon. That's when we'll have the most power, the best chance of breaking through completely. That night, I couldn't sleep. I stood on the balcony of our chambers, looking out over the moonlit gardens, my mind churning with anxiety. Tomorrow would either change everything or leave us back where we started. I felt Rowan before I heard him, his presence warm at my back. He pressed against my side, and I automatically buried my fingers in his fur. Are you afraid? I asked softly. Of tomorrow? Of what happens if it works? He made a questioning sound, his head tilting. When you can speak again, I continued, you'll be able to tell me I misunderstood everything. That this bond is just protection, just obligation. That once you're healed, you won't need some foolish human girl who spent her last coin on a creature she couldn't even recognize. Rowan moved then, deliberately positioning himself in front of me. His eyes caught mine and held, blazing with intensity. Then slowly, he lifted one massive paw and placed it over my heart. The gesture was so human, so deliberate, that tears stung my eyes. You're saying I'm wrong? I whispered. He pressed harder, his meaning clear. You're in here. You're part of me. That doesn't change. I wrapped my arms around his neck, burying my face in his fur. Tomorrow, then. We'll finish this tomorrow. The day of the final ritual dawned clear and bright. The palace was buzzing with energy. Everyone knew what was happening, that tonight the king would either return to his full power or remain trapped. The court's anticipation was palpable, electric. Theron found me in the library where I'd been trying to distract myself with books I couldn't focus on. The council wants to attend the ritual, he said without preamble. They're demanding it, actually, claiming they have a right to witness. No. The word came out sharper than I intended. This is private, intimate. I won't perform for an audience. Theron's expression softened with approval. Good. That's what I told them. But be prepared. If this works, they'll descend immediately. They have questions, demands, proposals that have been building for weeks. And if it doesn't work, he was quiet for a moment, then we continue as we have been. Rowan is still king, regardless of his form. Though, he hesitated. There are whispers, challenges being considered. Some of the older families think a king who can't shift is a king who's lost favor with the old gods. That's ridiculous. What happened to him was an attack, not divine judgment. I agree. But politics rarely care about logic. He sighed. Just be ready for anything. As the sun set, Moira came to collect us. She'd prepared the ritual chamber, a circular room at the heart of the palace, its walls carved with ancient symbols that seemed to pulse in the dim light. Candles surrounded a large circle of salt and crushed silver, herbs I couldn't name burning in braziers that filled the air with sweet, acrid smoke. This is it, Moira said, her expression serious. Everything we've been building toward. Elena, you'll sit in the center. Rowan, you'll position yourself facing her. The ritual will require you to draw on every ounce of connection you've built. You need to want him back. Not for the kingdom, not for duty, but for himself. The magic responds to truth, to genuine desire. I do want him back, I said quietly. More than anything. We took our positions. Rowan settled in front of me, close enough that our knees touched, his eyes locked on mine. Moira began the chant, her voice rising and falling in rhythms that seemed to resonate with something deep inside my chest. The candles flared brighter. The symbols on the walls began to glow, silver light bleeding from the carved stone. I felt power building in the room, pressing against my skin like static before a storm. Now, Elena, Moira commanded. Reach for him. Find the thread that connects you and pull. I closed my eyes and focused inward, searching for the bond I knew existed, but had never consciously touched. And there, a golden thread, warm and strong, stretching between my heart and his. I wrapped my will around it and pulled with everything I had. Pain exploded through my skull. I gasped, but didn't let go. I could feel Rowan on the other side, feel him pushing against the walls that bound him, feel his desperation to break free. The thread between us glowed brighter, pulling taut. More, Moira urged. You're almost through. I pulled harder, ignoring the blood I could taste in my mouth, ignoring the way my vision was darkening at the edges. Rowan's presence blazed on the other side, strong and fierce, and utterly unwilling to give up. Something cracked, then shattered. Light exploded through the room, so bright I cried out. I felt Rowan's presence surge, felt the walls break and dissolve, felt his power rush back into him like a tidal wave. When the light faded, I opened my eyes to find not a wolf sitting before me, but a man. He was breathtaking, tall and powerfully built, with dark hair that fell past his shoulders, and those same silver eyes that had haunted me for weeks. Scars marked his body, old battles written on his skin, and he was breathing hard, his chest heaving with the effort of transformation. Elena, he said, and his voice was deep, rough from weeks of disuse. My name on his lips made something in my chest crack open. Elena, look at me. I was looking, couldn't stop looking, couldn't breathe properly. He reached out with shaking hands and cupped my face, his touch gentle despite the tremor. I need you to understand something, he said urgently. Before the court comes, before everything changes again, You need to know. Know what? My voice came out barely above a whisper. That night in the alley, when you spent your last coin on a dying wolf, you didn't just save my life. You gave me something I'd lost: hope, purpose beyond duty. His thumbs brushed across my cheeks, catching tears I hadn't realized were falling. I am a king. I have responsibilities, obligations that I cannot simply abandon. But I am also just a man who has fallen completely, irrevocably in love with a woman brave enough to face down soldiers for him, patient enough to tend his wounds, foolish enough to follow him into a world that didn't want her. Rowan, I started, but he pressed a finger gently to my lips. I'm not finished. You said you were here for something more. I need to know. How much more? Because I can offer you safety, position, protection. But what I want to offer you is everything. My heart, my kingdom, my life. I want you beside me, not as pack, not as companion, but as my equal, my mate, my queen. The world stopped spinning. You're asking me to marry you? I'm asking you to choose me, he corrected softly. Not the king, not the crown, not the power, just me, the man who owes you everything. Behind him, Moira had tears streaming down her face, a smile breaking across her features. But I barely noticed her. All I could see was Rowan, this impossible man who'd trusted me with his vulnerability, who looked at me like I was precious. I chose you the moment I spent that copper coin, I whispered. I've been choosing you every day since. So yes. Yes to everything. He kissed me then, and it was nothing like the romances I'd imagined. It was desperate and gentle and fierce all at once, tasting of salt and magic and promises. His arms wrapped around me, pulling me close, and I finally understood what it meant to belong somewhere, to someone. The door burst open. Theron rushed in, followed by half the council, all of them stopping short at the sight of Rowan in human form, holding me like I was the only thing keeping him anchored to the earth. Your Majesty, Theron breathed, relief and joy naked on his face. You're back. Rowan didn't let me go. I am. And you should know. I'm claiming this woman as my mate, my future queen. Anyone who has a problem with that can challenge me directly. Silence fell over the assembled council. I saw calculation, surprise, even some approval in various faces. Then, one by one, they dropped to one knee, even the ones who'd been most hostile to me. Long live the king, they chorused. Long live the queen. The weeks that followed were a blur of preparations, negotiations, and adjustments. The council had questions, so many questions, about what had happened during Rowan's captivity. Who had captured him, and why? Captain Drystan launched an investigation that uncovered a plot by a rival kingdom, an attempt to destabilize Silvercrest by removing its king. The conspirators were dealt with through a combination of diplomacy and force that reminded me exactly how powerful Rowan truly was. But through it all, he remained the man I'd seen in that alley. Capable of gentleness, of vulnerability, of choosing compassion over cruelty. Our wedding took place during the next full moon, a ceremony that blended lichen tradition with human elements at my request. I wore silver that caught the moonlight, and Rowan wore his crown for the first time since his return. But when he looked at me, I didn't see the king. I saw the wolf who'd trusted me, who'd chosen to protect rather than dominate. The vows we spoke were ancient, binding us not just legally, but magically, the bond between us solidifying into something unbreakable. When it was done, when he kissed me before the assembled kingdom, the lichens howled their approval, a sound that echoed through the mountains and made my heart soar. 6 months later, I stood on the palace balcony, watching the sun set over the kingdom I'd somehow become part of. Rowan's arms wrapped around me from behind, his chin resting on my shoulder. Any regrets? He murmured against my ear. About that copper coin? I laughed, turning in his arms to face him. Only that I didn't have 2 copper coins. Think what I could have gotten with that kind of wealth. He growled playfully, nipping at my neck. You got the best possible bargain. A king for a copper. Though I think I got the better deal, a queen for a moment of hope in a dark alley. We saved each other, I said softly, reaching up to cup his face. That's what makes it perfect. Below us, the kingdom was settling into evening routines. Lycans and humans learning to coexist in ways that would have seemed impossible a year ago. My presence as queen had opened doors, started conversations, begun healing rifts that had existed for generations. There were still challenges, still those who questioned, who resisted change, but we faced them together, king and queen, wolf and woman. Two souls bound by a copper coin and a choice made in darkness. Rowan pulled me closer, and I rested my head against his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart, the same heart that had beat against my thigh in that alley, that had trusted me when he had no reason to. "Tell me the story again," I said, smiling up at him. "About the foolish girl who spent her last coin on a wolf with a sack over his head." "Once upon a time," Rowan began, his voice warm with love and amusement, "there was a girl brave enough to see worth where others saw only danger, and she saved not just a wolf, but a king. And in saving him, she became a queen. And they lived happily ever after," I finished. "No," he corrected gently, kissing my forehead. "Not happily ever after, just happily. One day at a time, one choice at a time, one copper coin's worth of faith at a time." And as the stars began to emerge above Silvercrest, as the kingdom settled into peaceful night, I knew he was right. This wasn't a fairy tale ending. It was a beginning. Of a life. Of a love. Of a future built on the foundation of one girl's compassion and one king's trust. And it was more than enough. It was everything.